had a new trailer drop for DUNE Prophecy, and we got the release date finally as well, along with the new trailer. It revealed that it's going to release November 17th. It's a 6-episode series, and it made me more excited actually than I have been. I wanted to see more of the other characters at play, the other elements of Frank Herbert's universe fleshed out. That was my hope for it. Desmond Hart, that character, is something that I've been the most curious about, I think. It's an original character, but he's always been the most intriguing for me, and I was wanting to see more of him and Mark Strong's Emperor, so we saw a lot of that footage in the new trailer. So that's what I was wanting. I want to see what are these other power players involved in this story. So the footage definitely included more of that and some pretty cool shots here, actually. Really nice imagery, cinema quality. And if they were going for, of course, the same aesthetic as Denis Villeneuve's adaptation, they definitely succeeded. But there were elements too that I appreciated, like this Space and Guild highliner here. It looks different. I mean, very similar, of course. It's this portal-esque ship, but it looks very different. It doesn't look as streamlined as the highliner in Denis Villeneuve's films. So I think that was cool to see some distinction there in the technology, because this is set 10,000 years before the rise of Paul Atreides. That was the one tidbit that they were always clear about, is where the show was set, but also just the aesthetic didn't seem to distinguish itself from it. And it is such a stark difference in the periods of time here. So that was cool to see. And Travis Fimmel, I think a lot of people were really excited for his involvement. They really like him and the work he's been in, The Vikings and Raised by Wolves, so they're excited to see more of him. And he really seemed like this Duncan Idaho-esque character, but I'm not sure if that was what they were trying to go for. There was a recent interview done with the showrunner, Alison Schapker, and she talked about the different timelines and what the show is really based on. So there seems to be a lot of confusion about what the show is based on. What's the source material? It's kind of a mix of things. And obviously the universe itself, the structure of it, that's Frank Herbert's universe. And I think at the end shot, it did say that this show is based off of Frank Herbert's epic universe and Sisterhood of Dune by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson. So the basic premise is we know there's going to be multiple timelines. We see the current timeline of what the show is set, which is the timeline of the older Valia and Tula Harkonnen sisters. But in the past, it's like 30 years before, and those events are from the Sisterhood of Dune novel. So some of the story in the show will be based off of that book. I don't know how closely it's going to adapt it per se, because it didn't say specifically that it was adapting Sisterhood of Dune, but like inspired by that. And since Valia and Tula Harkonnen are big players in that novel, that makes sense for their backstories. I don't know how much they're going to pull, but it seems like primarily the show will be set in an original, or the original material, which is the present timeline, 30 years after the Sisterhood of Dune novel. And that's when we see the older, mature Valia and Tula Harkonnen. We see Mark Strong's Emperor and Desmond Hart. So that's the present storyline, but we'll also, I guess, get flashbacks to the past. That portion will be taken or inspired by the Sisterhood of Dune novel. So hopefully I explained that well enough to where it's not so confusing. So there is going to be this mix of the broader universe based on Frank Herbert's world, elements taken from the stories of Sisterhood of Dune, the Brian Herbert, Kevin J. Anderson expanded novel there. But they're doing this new story themselves. And it seems like primarily it will be this new original story continuing on from the Sisterhood of Dune novel 30 years after that. And this will be uncharted territory, I guess, or unexplored territory for this new original part of the story. So we have these new characters, especially in particular with Desmond Hart, that we don't really know too much about, but is very interesting. I'm very curious how this will be structured, because we're going to go to the past, but also like go back and forth from the present, which is when we're going to see the mature Harkonnen sisters and Desmond Hart and Haviko Carino. But we will also see some visions of the future, which we did see in the trailer. We saw some kind of out there imagery. Definitely looked like they were visions. The Bene Gesserit only have limited foresight, so I am curious as to what kind of visions they're going to be seeing, or how the visions of the future will be incorporated here. Possibly some Gom Jabbar testing, or the Water of Life, or Spice Agony ritual, that kind of testing, acolytes taking under that ritual, see if they survive. We will get to see them, I guess, a successful transformation of the Water of Life, and see them unlocking that genetic memory. And there was this one image where it looked like one sister, we see her in this dark room with a bunch of women, And it kind of made me think, is this a visual representation of her genetic past, of her genetic memories? It's really hard to guess what's going on here, but there's a lot of other characters. There were scenes that didn't really grab me. There's a bunch of like random scenes that I don't know what's happening in the trailer. Like there are these two young people at a club, and we see one character who looks like a Fremen. She has the blue eyes of Ibad. There's a ton of characters that I just don't know who they are, what they're doing in the story, what the part is. As far as the trailer goes, they're just there. So that's why I'm the most intrigued by the politics, the Harkonnens, Atreides, and the Bene Gesserit, and the Emperor, and Desmond Hart. Those are the parts that intrigue me. And then we have a lot of other stuff that seems kind of thrown in here. As far as the way it looks, I think it does look good. And yeah, there's things that I wish looked a bit more different. Obviously, they wanted to have a similar aesthetic to the recent films. But in this trailer in particular, I feel like we see more of the Imperium, and that's kind of refreshing to see. We see these other elements and these other costumes and these other commercial players and political players, and I feel like we're seeing more of that. And technology, ships, that was nice to see. That looks good and it looks cinematic. I saw a lot of comments under the trailer like Dune of Thrones. I don't think most people have any qualms or issues with how it looks. It looks very expansive, and we're seeing all these different worlds. We're seeing all these different characters and factions, and hopefully explore more of the Imperium and its structure itself. I'm excited for that. And I'm excited for this world to be fleshed out more. For Denis Villeneuve's adaptation, it was streamlined. The world building was very streamlined. We got the information that we needed, but there was a lot of elements that were pushed to the side, especially in Dune Part 2, that we didn't get to see too much of. The politics and that, the commercial elements fleshed out. In particular with the Spacing Guild, especially in Dune Part 2. Like, we want to see how space travel works. We want to see these other elements and other agendas and power players represented. It's such a strange and complicated, complex universe. And the Bene Gesserit are only served by everything else being on the table as well. All these other power players involved. It can only help the Bene Gesserit and your depiction of them when we see the Imperium, when we see the commercial elements here, when we see the Mentats, the Spacing Guild, all of that. So that's why I'm excited. But, you know, expectations are wait and see. I'm hopeful. I hope it's good. I really do.